Michael talked about all the transitions that you've been through in your career, but I want to start with one in particular because you and I had lunch together a few years ago, and you were just at the point where you realized that all the people at this company that you were responsible for, who were involved in switching calls, were suddenly going to move to a completely different software-defined world where the skills they needed were not the skills that they had been honing for decades. That was a big moment for AT&T and for you.
It was a major wake-up moment for AT&T. This was, if I do the math, it was probably 4 years ago when we first were, kind of going through our business planning, and we're looking at the network transitions that were going to transpire and the technology transitions that were going on and virtualization and cloud technology and all that was inherent in that. And we got ourselves really comfortable that we had all the investments lined up, that the technology shifts we're going to be able to navigate them, and which is kind of what we do, right? We know those logistical exercises. We know how to change out networks and IT and that kind of stuff. And as we talked about it, though, we started discussing what is the skill set that's going to be required to run this thing out here at this date in the future. And it was so fundamentally different to what we were doing at that time and at scale that we stared at this and we said, this may be the biggest logistical challenge we have ever tackled. Doing a network change out, 3-4 year time horizon kind of deal, and you know how to line up everything and how to get the pieces in place. But to do a people change out is a whole different deal. And keep in mind, what we're talking about is at that time, we had 150,000 people running these networks and IT and so forth. And we looked out into the future and we said, based on the trends in technology, we're probably going to need less than 100,000 people to run this thing. Well, that was one big aha, but as you got into it, you said, okay, demographics are going to carry you.
That'll take care of that over time.
The biggest problem was the 100,000 people that were left had a totally different skill set, and you could not just go out and replace 100,000 people.
Well, you say you couldn't. You're sitting there, you're looking at your workforce, you realize you've got the wrong people for the future. One approach is to just start hiring people as quickly as you can and kicking people out the door.
It is practically impossible.
You couldn't have done it.
It could not be done.
Okay.
It's literally, even if you were a heartless SOB, you could not effectuate that and make it happen. And so the reality was we were going to have to come at this from bottoms up, build a plan on how you reskill and retool
100,000
people.
So how'd you do it?
Multifaceted. There were several different skill sets you're going to need. One of the top was you go out and you try to compete with Silicon Valley on getting the top flight software and engineering skills. That's pretty tough. And so I initiated a process with Sebastian Thrun at Udacity and Georgia Tech. And we said, we got to get some volumes of people with master's of computer science, that kind of proficiency. That's at the very highest level of what we needed. And this was a 2-year effort, by the way. It was a 2-year effort to get the Georgia government, the governor, the Board of Regents at Georgia Tech University to basically give us credentialing that if we put together a curriculum that is a non-resident type curriculum where our people, while they're working, could go through and get a Master of Computer Science degree with all the credentials of a Georgia Tech. That's what we were after. It was painful. We got it done, and we are delivering this Master of Computer Science degree, what costs today $42,000 at Georgia Tech. You can get the exact same degree for $6,600. All right. We're pumping people through here.
Only if you work for AT&T?
No, anybody.
Anybody can get that, but you created the degree.
We created the curriculum, we financed the curriculum, and helped Georgia Tech.
And do you give me a paycheck for 2 years while I'm going off to school and?
Yeah, but you're not getting time off, all right? I mean, if you have to take a Friday off to go do a test, of course, we give you time off. But we tell our people, this is
for you.
This is for you. We've done this, we're paying for it, we've stood the program up, it's for your benefit. If you want to take advantage of it, do it. And it's getting great uptake.
And if you don't take advantage of it, at some point you're going to be out of a job.
Yeah, That's the right. I mean, that's what one has to assume. I mean, look, it's a new contract, a societal contract, and we're just talking about one facet of it. But our contract is the world is changing, and it's changing fast, and our technology and our industry and our business is changing fast. You have to keep up, and if you are interested in keeping up, we're going to give you the tools and everything you need to stay up with it. And so, which takes us to the next facet of this. So that's at the highest level, the most proficient in terms of IT and computer technology and software and so forth. But we said, you know, there's this 100,000, you gotta put something that's scalable here. And we created curriculum for all these different areas where people needed to go. Everything from iOS programming, front-end web programming, to data analytics. I mean, just all kinds of new skills and capabilities we needed. We put the training and the education out there, and it really didn't begin to ferment and take off until we did one other thing. And this is really, really an important piece. Anybody who's contemplating this, you've got to get your HR systems organized around this. So that if you're an employee and you see a particular job opening or a particular job that you're interested in, you click on that job or on your smartphone, you look at that job. The first thing you see is what is the trend of that particular job. Are the numbers of jobs in the company doing this, or are they doing this? That's a very important variable. You have no idea how important that is to people. And if you see a job doing this, you see people hitting on that job, the numbers go way down. Jobs doing this, people are very interested. You click on that job, and it immediately tells you, here are the requirements for this job. And we'll call it credentialing, for want of a better word. But here are the skill sets that are required, and here, if you don't have these skills, here are the badges you need to earn, and here is the curriculum online in T University that you can go to and take this course and get that badge. And once you've got these badges, you're eligible, come out, apply for this job, and boom. We've had over 2 million of these things done. Course completions, just the badge numbers are really remarkable, and they're growing dramatically. And I would tell you, this big logistical exercise that I was daunted by 5 years ago, I'm actually feeling really, really energized and motivated by it.
How many people have taken you up on the offer, to the education offer?
2 million. There have been 2 million of these course completions done. Now, the badge numbers, it grows every week, but the badge numbers are in the hundreds of thousands.
So the workforce is really embracing it?
Oh yeah, big time. Not all.
Yeah.
You would expect not all. If you read the New York Times article that was done on this program, the New York Times reporter asked, do you expect all your employees to do this? And I said, no, of course not. He said, do you know anybody specifically who will opt out? I said, yes, my brother. He's an installer in Norman, Oklahoma.
Oh, they wrote that story, yeah.
And he did.
They did call him, yeah. It was too good to resist. You think he'll come around one day?
No. I was just with him last weekend, and as he said in the New York Times article, I'm going to ride this copper train to the ground, man.
So what I find, and by the way, we've had companies here that have been on the 100 best places to work for list for 19 years, 20 years. This is your first year.
It's our first year to be on. It's quite an honor.
And I suspect it has something to do with this program, yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think this program is core to it. I mean, to get on a list like this, you got to be doing a lot of things right, because remember, I mean, they study a lot of different areas, and they ask your employees, right? Do you think this is one of the best places to work? And so I think you got to be doing a number of things right.
Yeah, yeah, but you're there. I mean, I think this is a model. You're not the only company that's undergoing rapid, almost head-spinning transformational change. Is this a model for other companies dealing with the reskilling, retraining?
Oh, look, I think, here's how much conviction I have around this. No, this isn't a model for other companies. This is a model for society. And I even talking to our mayor. Communities need to be doing this. We need to be posting jobs in our communities. They're doing this, they're doing this. If they're doing this, what are the criteria? What's the badging? How can we begin to standardize around credentialing on very specific type jobs? And how can we now think about reskilling America or our communities' workforces to handle the work of the future? And I think this is very...
How do you make that happen?
So it's interesting. Tom Friedman wrote a book, and he featured what we're talking about in his latest book. And Tom came to see me just a couple of weeks ago, and he's pushing me to really push this harder, what I'm talking about here. Go take on a community. Pick one. Pick one and go in and put it in place. We have the technology, we have the know-how, we know how this works. Let's just go do it. I think he's onto something. And I think, we're a company with resources. I think we could show society something very important.
Would it be partnership with community colleges and
there's
business,
1,000 ways
both?
you can go at this. The first thing is, and I can't overemphasize this, you have to make available to the community this inventory of jobs. What are these jobs? And then you have to do an inventory of what are the skills required. Now, once you've got that, now you talk about how do you get the people the skills, and you probably partner with, it could be a community college. My guess is going to be one of the for-profit type organizations like a Udacity or Coursera, where you can stand up these capabilities very quickly, because you can turn this stuff fast. High quality, well-curated content, curated for this. It's really important. The whole world, you listen to our politicians, and they all say there's just not enough people that have broadband. And I say that's just crazy. Everybody has broadband. We need to make sure government is communicating and putting stuff in front of people, training, curriculum, access to government through these medium and these devices that everybody has, and it can happen.
But you say we need government to do these things. I mean, you've watched government up close. You ran the Business Roundtable. You've at least at the federal level, you've watched it close. I'm sure you have to watch it at the state level as well. It's not functioning terribly effectively. I mean, are we better off having businesses like AT&T take this on than expecting government to save the day?
Yeah, look, to your point, as we were going through this and we were standing this capability up, the Obama administration and Arne Duncan, who I respect a lot, I think he's really terrific.
Secretary of Education.
Secretary of Education under Obama. He called me on a couple of occasions wanting to engage the administration with what we were doing. And I did, on 2 occasions, say, no, we've got to move fast. This is absolutely critical, strategically and tactically critical for what AT&T has to accomplish. We have to go fast. I'm going to ask you, please, to stand down. I think we did that. Now, I think we can bring that same kind of urgency and capability to bear partnering with government. I'm not saying that government ought to just do it all, but I think government's going to have to engage.
Yeah, and in some cases it's not clear who the private sector actor would be. I mean, one of the examples that gets thrown around a lot these days is self-driving trucks, and you take the thousands of men who,
Right.
or men and women who currently drive trucks and get thrown out of those jobs. What are they going to do, and how do you train them to do something that society needs?
It's going to take major technology to affect this change. And this is the other thing I say. And this is why I'm always apprehensive to leaning solely on government, because if you think about what we've done, it's supportive of a comment I make routinely, and that is, if there is one sector of our economy that has miraculously avoided the productivity miracle of the last 30 years, it is our education system,
Yeah.
right?
Health might be in the
Health
running.
is close behind. It is very close behind. And so it's going to take technology. We could not have addressed our problem, begun this process at AT&T without a total and complete commitment to using technology to make this happen. So technology is going to be a big part of it.
Could this be a business for AT&T? I mean, you got the cell phones. You're about to be in the content business. You're in the content business. Could you be in the education business?
I don't know. I've given that some thought, candidly. I have thought about that. It would be the last time you saw somebody execute a strategy like that was Amazon and cloud technology, right? They stood up.
That worked,
right? And so, but
that's
rather lofty. But
but it's the same kind of thing. They had all this capacity that they were using for themselves, and they said, "Why don't we offer this to the world?"
Right. So is this something we've demonstrated? We've demonstrated we can do it at scale. We're demonstrating we can keep it current, we can keep it fresh, cost effective. And so is that something you could turn into a business and make some money and create some momentum of its own? I don't know. It's something worth thinking about.
Because it's really hard. I think it's hard for everybody to get their head around how central the smartphone is to all of our lives in so many different ways.
Right.
I mean, that's part of what's going on with your plans to purchase Time Warner, right? I mean, you're going to be in the media business. And I got to tell you from experience, I don't know why anybody wants to be in that business right now, but God bless you.
Because I want to dress like you. I want to lose the tie.
You want to take the tie off.
Exactly. Wear Argyle socks, do all that stuff, man.
You got black socks on.
Just
Okay,
boring.
just
Telecom.
checking.
They're not white, actually.
Just,
Yeah, so yeah.
just checking. But why do you want to own CNN?
Why would I not want to see it? What do you see as the downside of that, Alan?
You're baiting me. I was trying to bait you.
You know, I in all candor, I can't think of anything I've been more enthused about in the last 20 years than this. Because, look, say whatever you will, but the media business is at a major inflection point.
That is certainly true.
And it's going to have to pivot, and it's going to have to pivot to a world, I believe, of mobility. Mobility is where it is relevant. And so how can you begin to think about repurposing content into a world of mobility? And the one example you used, the largest news gathering organization in the world, I mean, if there's one area you think, wow, that is perfect for mobile delivery and mobile consumption. That's where consumers want to consume news. And so just the opportunity to kind of get into something like this and really begin to think about changing another industry, which needs to be changed.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely, it needs to be changed. And the reality is, you know, people say, well, that business is in decline. The business model is in decline, but viewership of premium content is not in decline. It is still
it's
growing,
up.
and it's growing
It's up
radically.
because of those phones, because
Right.
you can consume it anywhere, anytime.
And I've always said, if I want to be in an industry, I want to be in an industry where the demand and the utility of the business is just growing exponentially. And that's the case here. You know, I mean, you can say this business is mature. Okay, it is. But consumption on these devices is growing still at 40% year over year.
Yeah.
It's just a stunning number. And when you have consumption of media growing the same number and you put the two together, it just seems to me there ought to be some great opportunities here. And so that's what it's about.
The president doesn't like CNN.
I've read about that.
Yeah. What, has he talked to you about it?
Just fair and balanced, baby. Just fair and balanced.
You're not going to go there.
No.
Okay. You know, I have some connections with a company that's in the media business, makes about 1,000 pieces of content a day, 1 billion video views. If you're interested.
I'm trying to swallow this one right now, okay?
All right, well, when you're ready for another meal, you call me up.
You're on.
I want to talk about something else. An event, I don't think you ever intended for this to become public, but an event last September when you were in a similar situation to what Tim Ryan was talking about, where you talked about the race conflict that was going on in society. Can you tell a little bit about how you got to that point?
Yeah, to your point, it was supposed to be a family conversation with the AT&T family, and
happens to be a big family.
Yeah, it was a big family, but and you remember where we were last fall, 2016. In my lifetime, you know, I wasn't old enough really to remember the civil rights movement and how bad that was. So in my lifetime, that was about as bad a year for racial tension as I had experienced. And Tim talked about the Dallas shootings of police officers, and we saw the situation in Ferguson, Missouri, and it was just one thing after another, news roll after news roll after news roll, of black men being shot by police and police being killed, and I was kind of taken by just the whole level of tension in society. It was thick. And when you have 275,000 employees, you know, you're a reflection of the U.S. Society. And so there was tension inside our business as well. And I just remember I was getting ready to go speak to this group. And it was obvious to me nobody was bringing any kind of thinking that put all of this in some form of context. You know, what is the context? What's going on here? What are we witnessing here? And why is this tension here? And so as I was kind of reflecting on this and getting ready for this talk, just coincidentally, I received a video of a friend of mine who happens to be black. He's my best friend, and his wife is my wife's best friend. And it was a talk he gave where he was asked to address this issue. And what he said was stunningly profound in terms of why he, as a black man, was sympathetic to the Black Lives Matters protests, you know, and it offered a perspective by virtue of telling me about his history. Now, this guy and I have been very, very, very close for a long time. And the things I heard about his history, I had never heard before. And it occurred to me, if suddenly hearing his story about how he was raised and what he experienced growing up, created that kind of view in his mind about the events that were going on. And I said, we've been this close for 2 decades, and I never knew this about this guy. And if 2 of us that were this close had never had this conversation about race, is it any wonder why there's this tension and people aren't understanding and relating to each other about what the hell's going on here, right? And so I just wanted to share what I experienced with this guy, my own sentiment, and I was remarkably vulnerable, which I don't tend to be. CEOs don't do that, right? But I gave that talk. It was a little 12-minute talk. I don't think there was anything profound. I was quoting my friend predominantly.
Did you consult with anyone on, did anyone, same question, we talked to Tim about it, anyone say, maybe you don't want to go there, it's a little too raw?
You know what I did? I wrote the talk on an airplane, and I gave it to the guy who writes my speeches. Said, give me your reaction. I gave it to another individual, a white executive, and then I emailed it to 2 very senior African-American executives in AT&T, and I said, do not share this with anybody. I want your reaction. I think I'm going to give this talk tonight at this event. And unanimously, they said, you have to do this. And it felt a little risky at the time, but I gave the talk, and I literally walked off the stage, got in a car, I'm headed home, and my smartphone just was blowing up, right? You couldn't keep track of all the emails, and it
well, someone put it on YouTube.
Somebody captured on a video.
Which is not good family behavior.
It doesn't seem like it to me. But if it were my kids, we would be having a very serious talk. But the individual did, and it did blow up, and it became viral. And I got more calls, phone calls, the social postings and so forth, and this were over the top. And if somebody's going to take time to write you a long email, if it's that important to them, I always feel like I ought to read it. It took me a couple of months to catch up to it all.
Wow.
And the emails that came, they were profound. What I said was not so terribly profound. What these emails said in terms of how they received the message was profound. And both from, there were a number of white people who said, thank you. You've caused me to pause and reflect what is going on and how my black friends are perceiving this. Black people who wrote me long emails about their experiences and saying, thank you. Latinos, people in the LGBT community saying this is exactly, how I've experienced.
Well, one of the things you did in that speech, which I don't think had been that widely done at the time, was there was, Black Lives Matter had become a slogan, and then there was a reaction to it, sort of all life, every life matters, that sort of thing. You called that out in a very sharp way.
Yeah, and again, I was more than anything quoting my good friend who, he said, if somebody says I'm running for breast cancer, you don't say, what about prostate cancer? If they say, I sure love my son, you don't say, well, what about your daughter? And if the president says, God bless America, you don't say, shouldn't God bless all countries? And when somebody says Black Lives Matter, we should not say all lives matter to justify a need for change, right? And so that obviously had a strong reception, and it does. It causes you to pause, right? There are people who have had some really bad experiences. This is an interesting reaction to this. The number one request I got in social postings and in emails was, would you please share this with your peers, other CEOs in America? And so I did.
Yeah.
I did. I shared it with a group of CEOs, of the top CEOs in the country, that we get together twice a year. And I said, I'm fulfilling a commitment I made to share this with you. And there are 2 African-American CEOs in this group. These are all names you would know immediately. Many of them are your bosses in this room. And this conversation went on an hour and a half. And you heard Tim make the comment a moment ago about when you started having this conversation about race internal to his company, the African-American people talked about teaching their kids how to be stopped by a policeman. And one of the top African-American CEOs in America told that exact story. His wife was there when he's responding to this presentation I made. She's crying, and he said, this is the first time I've had this conversation with other CEOs about race. And it started a dialogue among all the CEOs. And so there's something important happening here. We hadn't fixed anything, folks. We have not fixed racial relations. But I do think we have empowered some of the largest companies in the world, we have empowered our employees to have this conversation.
But I think there's also something happening in leadership, and tell me if you agree with this. I think this wouldn't have happened 15 years ago or 20 years ago. There was much more of a heads-down approach to how you run a company. You know, you don't get involved in controversial issues. You pay attention to the business, and there is a sense, because of the rapid pace of change, because of the prevalence of social media, because anything you say to your employees is going to end up on YouTube, and because people react so emotionally to all that stuff, that you have to lead in a very different way today than you would have 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's fair, Alan, and I think it's accurate. You know, the way I process this, and whether it is workforce reskilling, whether it is racial tension, whether it's taking on issues like immigration or education, our abysmal education system, like I think we have a responsibility to our shareholders to tackle these issues. And a company like AT&T, you know, we will generate $160 billion of revenues just out of the United States of America in this year, just out of the U.S. And we have to ask ourselves, if we want to grow and prosper in this country over the next 10 or 15 years, what needs to be happening in the United States to make that possible? And look, if you're in an economy or a market that is just rife with racial tension, that ain't exactly productive to people wanting to go out and spend discretionary income. It is anathema to that kind of behavior. If you want to be in a market that is growing and vibrant and has great economic growth, you need a vibrant and growing middle class, and to have that, you better have a good education system. Yeah. Without the education system, you have no middle class. If you want a good, healthy, growing, vibrant population, just left to our own devices, our population isn't growing, folks. And a no-growth population is a no-growth economy. If you want a growing population, you have to have immigration. So I just think we have to figure all these things out.
You're getting a little political. You wouldn't let me ask political questions.
That's not political, right? It's economic. It is truly economic and moral.
You talked about how people at large reacted to the speech, but talk a little bit about how your employees reacted. I mean, you know, to them, you were just the guy with the boring socks.
I'm going to change, man. I'm changing.
What was the employee reaction?
It was, as a CEO, you always have to be cautious evaluating employee response, because it's very few employees that have the courage to tell you what an idiot you are, right? And so you get a lot of confirmation bias as a CEO. But the volumes of the response from the employees, black, white, Latino, LGBT, I could go on and on, was overwhelmingly a voice of thank you. And then the employees have picked it up, as Tim commented. We have sessions all over this company now where people are just setting up lunches and having discussions about race. My executives are sponsoring within their work groups conversations about race and diversity. And so within AT&T, as I said, it just gave people permission to do something I think they were yearning and dying to do. It picked at a raw nerve and said, go have a conversation about this.
Now, we would be remiss if we left these people thinking that all employee relations at AT&T are perfect.
Well, we had a strike last weekend.
Yeah, I was going to say, you got this little thing going on with the communication workers. I mean, how do you think about that?
Look, they're doing what they need to do, right? It's interesting that a lot of companies in the U.S., they kill themselves to avoid collective bargaining and unionization. We've dealt with it for our entire existence, and we have made it work. Our cost structure is a best-in-class cost structure in the United States of America, in our industry. Our customer service is best in the industry. It's among the best in the industry. And so we make it work. And if employees need to get together, and if they feel that they need to collectively come together and bargain for wages and benefits and work rules, we'll make it work. It's incumbent upon me and our executives to make sure we explain and have a good conversation on why we can't go certain areas. and draw bright lines. And the deal last weekend, we drew a bright line. And they said we'd drawn a bright line too. And said, okay, then let's do what we need to do. Let's get on with it. And so you'll deal with those. You'll have work stoppages as a result. But bottom line, it's been productive for us when we have issues, political issues, that are really important to our company, like net neutrality. I will tell you, our labor union gets on board, and they support us in the political environment. Tax reform, corporate tax reform. They have been supportive that we need our labor union says we need corporate tax reform. Why would they advocate that? Because our labor union, I've had extensive talks with the leadership, and I have said, understand this, that the United States of America is investing the lowest amount of capital as a percentage of the economy since World War II. And every $1 billion we invest is 7,000 hard hat jobs. With corporate tax reform, you will mechanically see more capital investment. It is in your best interest. They get it. They go and they advocate for it. They go and talk to their Democratic colleagues about we need this corporate tax reform. So, look, would I rather not deal with collective bargaining? Is it a headache sometimes? Of course, but we make it work.
You think tax reform, go ahead, you can oblige, it's all right. He doesn't mind. You think tax reform is going to happen?
God, it just seems like it has to. You talk to Paul Ryan, which I have. You talk to his counterparts on the Democratic side, which I have. They both say we are uncompetitive. The tax rates are uncompetitive. That's why capital is flowing to other countries. You talk to the Senate side. It has to happen. And so I think we're at a moment in time where if we don't do it now, if we don't do tax reform now, we're going to miss a golden opportunity.
We don't want to get too deep into tax reform, but my political education was covering the 1986 tax reform bill. Wrote a book on it.
Last time we had a major one.
I wrote a book called Showdown at Gucci Gulch, which is still available on Amazon. You can use your smartphone to order it.
We need another Jim Baker right now.
Yeah, but what I remember in terms of the business community is that there were some pretty big fights over things like oil depletion allowances that some businesses wanted and some businesses didn't. But every press release I got in those days began with the words, "We support tax reform," and then they'd say, "But we'd really like you to consider not doing this or doing that." That's not what I'm hearing now. I mean, the folks who oppose this border adjustment tax, I get 10 press releases a day, and they're vicious, attacking Jeff Immelt for supporting it. And the business community doesn't really seem to be aligned behind.
I would disagree with you, and let me kind of bifurcate it a little bit. If we would stop, if we would pass legislation that says you're not allowed to use the word comprehensive in anything we're trying to do legislatively, it'd be amazing what would happen.
Not allowed to use the word
comprehensive. We say comprehensive tax reform. We need to have comprehensive tax reform because we'd like to get the rate down to 15%. That would be beautiful. We would all advocate, we'd stand up, we'd raise our hands and say, amen, we're all in, let's go do it. But you start trying to get to 15%, you can't get there without things like border adjustment taxes. You can't get there with a lot of other things, even on the payroll side. If you say we have to get our tax rate to a competitive level, what's competitive? 25% is competitive. We know, arithmetically we know you can get to 25% without tackling any of those issues. If our objective is get the tax rate to a competitive level, you know whose ox gets gored the biggest on making that happen? AT&T, the largest capital investor in the United States.
Investment tax credit, or?
We would lose bonus depreciation and accelerated depreciation.
Yeah.
Billions of dollars a year for AT&T. Our tax bill would go up the first 3 or 4 years.
And you'll do that?
We are all in.
Yeah, and you think other businesses in that situation?
In fact, as chairman of the BRT, and Jamie Dimon has picked up this mantra to get to 25%, I've got the entire executive committee of the BRT saying, let's hold hands, let's jump together. We will jump together. It means Rex Tiller, not Rex anymore, but ExxonMobil, you're going to lose the intangible drilling costs, credits. You're going to, we're all going to lose these.
And they're going to do it.
Get to 25%, would we do it? We would do it. That deal is to be had, all right?
Well.
But you throw the word comprehensive on, and my God.
You blow it up.
You say comprehensive immigration reform. Here we go, right?
All right, we only have a little bit of time left, and this group doesn't care that much about tax policy, but you do? You want to do... I mean, because we can go into his depreciation allowance.
Come on, yeah.
Pretty deep. Talk a little bit about what you've learned and give some takeaways to these people about what you've learned about how to create a culture that can deal with the kind of dramatic change that folks at AT&T are going through and stick with you and be loyal to the company in the process.
The first lesson learned, and this is the most important thing, is be honest and transparent. You have to tell your people that we got a big issue facing us, and you don't have the right skills for the next 5 years. You got to have that conversation. You have to help them understand it, and you have to take it to them. You have to communicate it to them, and after you've communicated it to them, you have to come back and communicate it again and again and again and again, and you cannot stop. This is a huge priority. You got to make them understand this is one of the most important strategic issues facing you as a company. And then you have to commit to putting the tools available, making the tools available to them to take care of their situation. You just can't accomplish it without those two variables. And by the way, making the tools available, you better think about 2-3 cents per share of earnings. It doesn't come cheap. If you find a cheap way of doing it, please come talk to me, let me know. But this is 2 or 3 cents of earnings per share, per year, for the rest of your lives in that company, all right? You can't stop. And once you get the retooling you think done, it means you've just begun, because this technology shifts that we're experiencing, they're not going to stop.
Keep happening.
They're going to continue to happen. And as soon as we get through virtualization and cloud computing and the shift to mobility, then welcome to augmented reality and bots and what that's going to do in the workforce and how that's going to fundamentally and radically change the workforce. This is just going to continue for the foreseeable future, forever.
On that, we should probably have lunch, right?
I'm all in.
Randall Stephenson, thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you very much.